Specters in the shade work toward their plea, following a tradition dating back to old Tennessee. These ghouls and gals prowling behind the United States Congress are known as Shadow United States Senators and Shadow United States Representatives. Historically, these shadow congressmen were elected by organized incorporated territories prior to their admission to the Union, first sited in the Appalachian Wilderness of Tennessee. This method of assimilation is known simply as the Tennessee Plan. The first shadow senators were William Blount and William Koch of the Southwest Territory, elected from the Dank Marsh in March 1796, from which they would never return as the same men. For soon after their shadow reign, they were seated as actual senators representing the newly formed state of Tennessee. This same eerie tale would be repeated across the nation in Michigan, California, Minnesota, Oregon, and finally, Alaska. The desolate tundra known as the Alaska Territory would also elect the first shadow U.S. representative, Ralph Julian Rivers, in 1956. Not only would Alaskans build upon the roster of the Shadow Congress, but one of their shadow senators would break from tradition, sealing the Shadow Congress of the U.S. away for 3 decades straight, returning in a form unseen. This man was William A. Egan, who instead of running for the newly created Alaskan Senate seat, as did all his shadow predecessors, would instead serve as the state's first governor. While the Shadow Congress lay dormant throughout the 60s, 70s, and 80s, they had set their sights on the nation's capital, the District of Columbia, to emerge once more. How did they do this? The election of shadow congresspersons from the District of Columbia was authorized by a state constitution ratified by D.C. voters in 1982 that was never approved by Congress. The voters of the District of Columbia elect 2 shadow U.S. senators who are known as Senators by the District of Columbia, but who are not officially sworn or seated by the U.S. Senate. Their elections began in 1990. The first class of D.C.'s shadow senators would be national names Florence Pendleton and Jesse Jackson, who would then be supplanted by Mike Brown and Paul Strass that serve to this very day. This afterbirth of the Shadow Congress would follow in the ways of Alaska and elect 1 shadow representative who is recognized as equivalent to U.S. representatives by the District of Columbia, but is not recognized by the U.S. government as an actual member of the House of Representatives. The current host of this position is Oye Owolewa, but be warned, DC's shadow U.S. representative should not be confused with the non-voting delegate who represents the district in Congress. Still, the Shadow Congress continues to spread, most recently with Puerto Rico, created in the Island Sausage Factory in 2017 as part of the newly formed Puerto Rico Equality Commission, as the island's party rulers fulfill campaign promises made by the new Progressive Party. Pro-statehood Governor Ricardo Rossello appointed 5 shadow representatives and 2 shadow senators with the advice and consent of the Senate of Puerto Rico. However, this ruling would not stand in its birth form, as after the pro-statehood vote in the 2020 Puerto Rican status referendum, the Puerto Rican legislature passed in a lame duck session Law 167 of 2020, replacing the Puerto Rico Equality Commission with the new commission to the Congressional Delegation of Puerto Rico and establishing an electoral process for shadow delegates to Congress. Although an effort to overturn Law 167 passed the House of Representatives of Puerto Rico, in early 2021, after the Popular Democratic Party gained control of the legislature, it did not have enough votes to sustain a threatened veto from pro-statehood Governor Pedro Pierluisi. From now until the heat death of the universe, popular elections for 2 shadow senators and 4 shadow congressmen will be held on a nonpartisan basis every 4 years, with the first election held on May 16, 2021. The law also appropriated funds for the Puerto Rico Federal Affairs Administration to cover the wages of the delegates and serve as their headquarters in Washington, D.C., where they will work on the statehood process with the island's resident commissioner in Congress. Now, as you try to sleep knowing the Shadow Congress prowls in the back halls of Washington, remain calm, for you may outlive it yet. Be sure to contact your non-shadow senators and representative, urging them to support statehood for D.C. and Puerto Rico, so once more the Shadow Congress shall slumber in the pits of hell. Also, be sure to have a spooky October and a happy Halloween.